You will hear a number of different recordings, and you will have to answer questions on what you hear. There will be time for you to read the instructions and questions, and you will have a chance to check your work. All the recordings will be played once only. The test is in 4 sections. At the end of the test, you will be given 10 minutes to transfer your answers to an answer sheet. Now turn to Section 1. Section 1. You will hear a man phoning to inquire about a job vacancy. First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 4. Now we shall begin. You should answer the questions as you listen, because you will not hear the recording a second time. Listen carefully and answer questions 1 to 4.
Good evening, King's Restaurant.
Good evening. I'm ringing about the job I understand you have vacant.
Oh, yes.
I'd like to find out a few more details, if I may.
Yes, of course. Can I take your name?
It's Peter Chin.
OK, Peter. Well, if you want to ask about the job, and then if we're both still interested, we could arrange for you to come for an interview.
Great, thanks. I'm afraid I missed the advert for the job, but heard about it from a friend.
That's no problem at all. What would you like to know?
Well, what sort of work is it? Washing up?
It's answering the phone.
Oh, right, fine.
And not waiting at table.
That'd be good. And how many nights a week would it be?
Well, we're really only busy at the weekend.
So 2 nights?
3, actually, so it would work out at 12 hours a week.
That'd be fine. It wouldn't interfere with my studies.
Are you at the university?
Yes, first-year physics student.
Oh, right.
And because I'm not an EU national, would I need a work permit?
Yes, you would. Just get your tutor to sign it.
That wouldn't be a problem if I were to get the job. Where exactly is the restaurant?
Well, we have 2 branches. The one we're recruiting for is in Hillsdon Road.
I don't know that. How do you spell it, please?
It's HILLSDUNNE Road.
Got that. Thanks. Is it near a bus stop?
Yes, the nearest one would probably be just beside the library.
Oh, yes, I know it. That'd be fine for me. And could I ask about the pay?
We're offering £4.45 an hour.
That's very good. My last job was £3.95 an hour.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 5 to 10. Now listen and answer questions 5 to 10.
We feel it's pretty good, and we also offer some good fringe benefits.
Really?
Well, we give you a free dinner, so you eat well.
Right. Better than hostel food.
We certainly hope so. And we also offer extra pay for working on national holidays.
Oh, that's a really good perk, isn't it?
Yes, we think so. And then because of the difficulties of getting public transport, if you're working after 11 o'clock, we drive you home.
Oh, that's good to know.
Well, we'd certainly be interested in inviting you for an interview, if you're still interested.
Oh, yes, certainly. Could I just also ask what qualities you're looking for?
Well, for this particular job, we want a clear voice, which you obviously do have.
Thanks.
And you must be able to think quickly, you know.
Well, I hope I...
So, when could you come in for an interview? We're actually quite quiet tonight.
Sorry, I couldn't come tonight. Or tomorrow, I'm afraid. Thursday's okay. That'd be 22nd of October?
Fine. After 5 p.m?
Yes, fine. Would 6 o'clock be okay?
Perfect. And could you bring along the names of 2 referees?
Yes, that's fine. No problem.
Good. I look forward to seeing you.
Oh, by the way, who should I ask for?
Oh, yes, of course. Sorry. My name is Samira Manuja.
Can you spell that, please?
Manuja.
Okay. I've got that. Thanks very much.
Look forward to seeing you later on then.
That is the end of section 1. You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turn to Section 2. Section 2. You will hear a radio programme in which a presenter called Jasmine tells her colleague Fergus about a charity. First, you have some time to look at questions 11 to 15.
Pause the recording for 30 seconds.
Now listen carefully and answer questions 11 to 15.
And now here's Jasmine, who's come to tell us about this week's charity.
Hi, Fergus. This week, I'm going to talk about forward thinking and their plans for the Colville Centre. So, in recent years, people have realised how useful the arts can be within healthcare. The idea behind forward thinking is to use the arts to promote well-being. The charity develops projects for people with special needs and health problems, and also delivers training to healthcare professionals in using the arts, as well as supplying them with information and advice. Forward thinking doesn't just run art and craft classes to distract people who are ill, or recovering from illness, but arranges longer-term projects and courses, as it's been shown that the arts can bring all sorts of positive changes in patients, including benefits such as shortening the length of stay in hospital and reducing the amounts of medicine they need.
I see.
Forward thinking has experience of working with a broad range of people, from young adults with learning difficulties to older people in homes or daycare centres and people with physical disabilities. The organisation's been around since 1986, and it gradually expanded during the 1990s. Then, in the new millennium, it was decided to find a memorable name. So it's been operating as Forward Thinking for several years, in fact since 2005. It's quite a locally based charity, mainly for people in the southern part of this region, which includes all rural and urban communities outside the city of Clifton, which has its own organisation. There are, of course, some similar charities in other parts of the country, in London and so on.
And what's the present fundraising in aid of?
Yeah, well, the charity needs funding in order to buy the Colville Centre. This is a former village school, which was built in 1868. It was modernised and refurbished by the present owners last year, so it's ideal for art classes and for small social events, performances, seminars and so on. Forward Thinking is fundraising to purchase the building so they can use it to continue running classes and so on for the general public, and eventually also for some of the people they help.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 16 to 20.
Pause the recording for 30 seconds.
Now listen and answer questions 16 to 20.
Right. So, can you give us a few ideas about what classes people might do there? Is it all art classes?
Well, there are some very good art classes, but there are lots of other things going on as well. So, for example, there's Learn Salsa with Nina Bellina's team. They say that salsa is an easy dance to learn. It's also an excellent form of exercise, according to Nina. And that class is for both men and women, of course.
Uh-huh.
It's ideal for beginners and what they call refreshers. That's £100 for 10 sessions. Then, another class is called Smooth Movers. It's with Kevin Bennett. And it's for you if you don't have the same energy levels as you used to when you were a teenager. It's a gentle exercise class, geared to the needs of whoever is in the group in a particular session. And Kevin is qualified to teach classes to people getting over injuries and so on, and balance training. That's £60 for 10 sessions. Then there's a day called Art of the Forest with Jamie Graham, where you discover Upper Wood, a short walk from the Colville Centre, and learn how to design in 3D with natural materials. It's an unusual and exciting way to be creative. Jamie is an artist, with a background also as a country park ranger.
Oh.
For this day, youngsters must be accompanied by a parent or guardian, and the costs are adults, £40, under 14s, £10. But it's best value at £80 for a family of 4. The next one is The Money Maze, and this is a series of talks by Peter O'Reilly, an independent financial advisor. He gives advice on family finances, things like everything parents need to know about managing the costs of bringing up children, sending them to university, and actually also about care for elderly relatives. It's £10 per talk, which will all go to support forward thinking. And as a final example of what's on offer, there's Make a Play. That's for 8 to 14s. And this activity is such a hit that it usually sells out within days of being announced. Basically, what you do is write, rehearse, and perform a play in just 2 days. And it doesn't require any previous experience. I gather there's lots of fun and silliness along the way. And the best bit, perhaps, is that there's a performance for family and friends at the end.
Oh.
It's just £50 for 2 days.
Pretty good range of activities, I think. And all raising money for a good cause.
Yes. And the all-important contact details are colville@forwardthinking.org.uk or write to me.
That is the end of section 2. You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Pause the recording for 30 seconds.
Now turn to section 3. Section 3. 2 overseas students called Spiros and Hiroko have just finished the first semester of their university course. They are discussing with their English language teacher how they coped with the course. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 25. Now listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 25.
Before we start, Spiros and Hiroko, thanks for coming in today to talk about your recent study experiences, and congratulations to you both in doing so well in your first semester exams.
Thank you.
I'd like to discuss with you the value of the English for Academic Purposes course you did here last year before starting your university course. Spiros, if I could start with you, what parts of the program have now proved to be particularly valuable to you?
I think that having to do a seminar presentation really helped me. For example, a couple of weeks ago in our marketing subject, when it was my turn to give a presentation, I felt quite confident. Of course, I was still nervous, but because I had done one before, I knew what to expect. Also, I know I was well prepared, and I had practiced my timing. In fact, I think that in relation to some of the other people in my group, I did quite a good job, because my overall style was quite professional. What about you, Hiroko?
That's interesting. In my group, I was really surprised by the way the students did their presentations. They just read their notes aloud. Can you believe that? They didn't worry about their presentation style or keeping eye contact with their audience. And I remembered that these things were really stressed to us in the course here.
So, how did you approach your presentation, Hiroko?
Well, to speak frankly, I read my notes too. At the time, it was a relief to do it this way, but actually when I had finished, I didn't feel any real sense of satisfaction. I didn't feel positive about the experience at all.
That's a pity. You know, although I was pleased with my presentation, I am not so pleased with my actual performance right now in the tutorials. During the whole semester, I've not said anything in our tutorial discussions. Not a word.
Really, Spiros? Why's that? Do the other students talk too much?
It's partly that, but it's mostly because I have had no confidence to speak out. Their style of speaking is so different. It's not the style we were used to during the course. They use so many colloquialisms. They're not very polite, and sometimes there seems to be no order in their discussion. Also, they are very familiar with each other, so because they know each other's habits, they can let each other into the discussion.
You're right, Spiros. I've experienced that too.
Before you hear the rest of the conversation, you have some time to look at questions 26 to 30. Now listen and answer questions 26 to 30.
For most of this semester, I've said absolutely nothing in tutorials. But recently, I've been trying to speak up more, and I just jump in, and I've noticed an interesting thing. I've noticed that if they thought my point was interesting or new, then the next time they actually asked for my opinion. And then it was much easier for me to be part of the discussion.
Oh, that's great, Hiroko. I hope that happens for me next semester. I'll have to work hard to find some interesting points. What helped you to find these ideas?
I think that one thing that helped me with this was the reading. I've had to do so much reading this semester just to help me make sense of the lectures. At first, I couldn't understand what the lectures were talking about. So I had to turn to the books and journals. Every night I read for hours, using the lists of references that were given, and I made pages of notes. At breakfast I read and read my notes again. This habit has helped me to follow the ideas in the lectures, and it's also given me some ideas to use in the tutorials.
But I did so much reading anyway. I don't think there's any time left over for anything extra. My reading speed is still quite slow, though I'm much better at dealing with vocabulary than I used to be.
What else do you think we could add to the course program to help with this reading problem?
There's not really anything because it's my problem. I remember we were given long articles to read. We didn't like that, but now I realize that reading those long articles was good preparation for the things I need to read now. Also, in class, we regularly had speed reading tasks to do, and we kept a record of our reading speed, so the teachers were encouraging us to work on that.
That's true, Spiros, but what we read could have been different. Sometimes in the English class, I felt frustrated when I had to read articles about the environment or health or education, because I wanted to concentrate on my own field, but we didn't read anything about engineering. So I think I wasted some time learning vocabulary I didn't need.
But surely the strategies you were taught for dealing with that vocabulary were helpful?
Yes, but psychologically speaking, I would have felt much better working on reading from my own field. What do you think, Spiros?
Oh, I agree. That would have helped my confidence too, and I would have been more motivated. It was good, though, that we could work on our own topics when we wrote the research assignments.
Okay, let's move on to writing now.
That is the end of section 3. You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turn to section 4. Section 4. You will hear a lecturer giving the beginning of a talk on the history of British pottery. First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40.
Pause the recording for 1 minute.
Now listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40.
Thank you for coming to this series of talks. Before I talk in detail about the experiments and innovations of the British ceramicists, I'd like to give you a summary of the social and manufacturing background in which they lived and worked. So, we're talking about England, or more specifically, the region known as the Midlands, and we need to go back mainly to the 18th century and briefly even earlier to put it in a global context. Now, at that period, the majority of the population, whatever their station in life, as you might say, were dependent for their living, in one way or another, not on the geographical location of where they lived, but on the physical characteristics of the actual land they lived on. This is true whether we're talking about the aristocracy, the owners of great estates who incidentally had no snobbery about the concept of making money from all the reserves of coal or timber or stone on their rolling acres, or the farmers making a fat living from the rich soils. And besides these groups, and the less affluent ones, the deposits of iron ore and lead, the limestone and flint, and the brown and yellow clays also sustained the numerous industries in the area. It's important to recognise that it was already an industrial region and had been so for centuries. There were many Midland trades, some of them indigenous, some of them not. For example, there were immigrants from France who came as early as the late 16th century, and they were producers of glass. A century later, there is plenty of evidence that the variety of trades was enormous. There was brewing in Burton-on-Trent, silk weaving and ribbon making near Coventry, framework knitting around Nottingham, and of course in Cheshire men dug the salt, as we still do nowadays even, which in that era was sent downriver to the estuary of the Mersey. Now, among these well-established trades, one of the oldest of the local crafts was pottery. As you will probably be aware, ceramics has always been a mix of science, design and skill. And a good potter is, in a sense, an experimental chemist, trying out new mixes and glazes and needing to be alert to the impact of changes of temperature on different types of clay. For 200 years, up to the time we are concerned with, potters had been making butter pots and pitchers and patterned plates, using the clay which was plentiful in the area where they lived, in a handful of North Staffordshire villages dotted along the low hills. Now I want to explain a little about the industrial processes which had preceded the great breakthrough in Germany in 1708. That's when the formula for porcelain was discovered, a secret that had been held in China for 1,000 years. In the Midlands, in England as elsewhere, there had basically been two kinds of pottery. The first is still known as earthenware. Now, this was a bit rough and ready, but it was deservedly popular for several reasons. To start with, it was relatively cheap, so it could be used by most households. This was because it could be made from local clay without any complicated processing or added materials. From the potter's point of view, there was another reason for its cheapness. This was that it could be fired in simple ovens or kilns, and at relatively low temperatures, so he didn't have to spend so much money on fuel to achieve the necessary heat. On the other hand, after one firing in the kiln, the problem with earthenware was that it remained porous, so had limited usefulness. So for most purposes, it had to go back in the kiln for a second firing before it became waterproof. And another thing was that it was extremely breakable. I mean, before it had even been sold. I suppose the potter wouldn't have minded so much if people just had to keep coming back for more every time they broke a jug or whatever. But it was very inconvenient because it meant there was a lot of wastage in the course of the manufacturing process. Anyway, for all these reasons, if people could afford it, and that would be all but the very poor, they would buy stoneware, a much tougher product. Now, for this, the potter used a slightly more expensive raw material, which was made by combining clay and flint, and this mixture was fired at a far higher heat, with the result that the ingredients vitrified. That is to say, in effect, the whole thing became glassy. And because of this, it was non-porous, and naturally this was regarded as a great advance. Well, that's the situation in the 18th century. Are there any questions at this stage? OK, so now we can go on to look at the age of innovation.
That is the end of section 4. You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Pause the recording for 30 seconds.